This is the YouTube video for the domestic violence portion of the two final papers for CJ205. Remember, with these papers, you will be preparing these papers in a similar fashion that the other one-page papers were prepared during the semester. Taking a look at the domestic violence cases, for many years the domestic violence cases were considered to be among the most hazardous of calls that police officers could respond to. More recent studies are indicating that if police are cautious about what they do, the domestic violence call can basically be a routine call as far as the officer's safety goes. It is still one that, working as a police officer, my experience has taught me that there's still a great deal of potential for violence in cases where police officers respond to disputes between husbands and wives, people who are cohabitating or otherwise living together. Most of this really revolves around, in my view and from my experience, the fact that emotions tend to run high in these type of cases. Now, if we take a look at the violence that has occurred between intimates, most statistics will show that about 81% of the cases typically involve some type of an assault, whether that assault be a simple assault where you may have somebody get punched, somebody pushed, somebody shoved, a minor injury. A significant number of the cases will involve people who have committed very violent crime toward each other, where serious bodily injury, a maiming, broken bones, something along those lines will have occurred. Statistics also indicate that typically women will most often be the victim of a domestic violence type call to the police department. The typical call coming into the police department, and studies will tend to bear this out, indicate that the most likely people to call the police to seek intervention in their domestic problems are going to be non-whites, and I really believe that this really should be read as a wealthy person. The gap, I think, involves wealth. Even among African Americans, people of Asian or Hispanic descent, when they are wealthy individuals and they have kind of prestigious positions. For example, mayors of cities, governors, business executives, very high-profile lawyers or owners of law firms, medical practices, things like that, where there's a good deal of wealth around. These people will typically seek out more private intervention into their domestic problems, and I suspect most of that is because once they engage the services of, for example, an attorney, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or some other professional like a marriage counselor or a social worker, those folks are all governed by ethics and ethics rules in their professions. So one of the things that they will not do is publicize or make public the information that's going on about that individual's domestic difficulties. So for example, we see with a lot of actors and actresses are always make good examples. You'll see a show like TMZ or one of the tabloids will get a hold of a story about how this actor or actress is having a great deal of difficulty with with their marital situation or their living situation, and they make it public. And a lot of times the actor or actress or that celebrity has not made that information public because it's just not something that their publicist is going to do. So I think really the gap there more than race is a gap between people of wealth and people, or people of means and people who do not have the means. The people who do not have the means to employ professionals are typically going to call the police, and my experience has been that that will run across races. The information on the race I did garner and gather from the text, and it was published in, I believe, the current text, and it was also discussed in one of the prior texts that I had used. One of the last areas I wanted to touch on in this intro to the domestic violence and the police response to it is that up until about the late 1970s, early 1980s, there was a very little study of the problem of domestic violence and the role that police should take as interveners in domestic violence cases. Now, as I had indicated during class the other night, on this past Wednesday night, the Comprehensive Domestic Violence Act started to come into being in about 1982-83, in that time frame. If we take a look at the history of the police involvement in domestic cases, typically police officers would have been trained from the time they first put on their gun, their badge, and had been certified to go out to work as officers. The training was kind of geared towards mediating the problem on the scene and then discouraging the parties from signing complaints. There was a lot of valid reasons for this to occur. There was kind of a social stigma attached to it. The police were also seen as a really not the entity that should be intervening in domestic cases. And then lastly, the one issue that always comes up with discouraging parties from signing complaints is that if they sign a complaint, the officers wanted to make sure that the parties would show up in court and would be willing to testify against their spouse. And as is frequently still the case, one of the things that does happen is that you'll have people who are today quite angry with each other. They will sign complaints against each other, and by the time the court date rolls around in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and then after we go through 3 or 4 postponements to bring medical professionals to the courtroom or bring in the records of the treatment that the victim received at a hospital or by a doctor or by a psychologist or by a psychiatrist, we would typically see people would want to drop the charges. So the last area that from the history that we would want to pay attention to is a lot of times people would not call the police. The victims kind of took the view that was common in the society at the time, that it was a personal matter. It was private. It was something that public and the public safety officials should not get involved in, and people didn't call. So the traditional response by police is that they would proceed slowly with the cases. They would mediate or arbitrate the disputes, and typically the victims were discouraged from signing complaints against their attackers. It seems that one of the first things we should do here in our look at domestic violence cases is try to establish who's more likely to do what and how people are likely to treat each other. If we take a look at who is more likely to attack another person, one of the things that studies are starting to show is that among female victims in particular, the female is very much more likely to be attacked by somebody that they know or know well. The line between the intimates and the friends and acquaintances and the strangers, if you take a look at the chart on the left, seem to converge, especially in the as the statistical gathering really started to gather steam, particularly around 1990. You see that the blue and the black line really start to converge with each other. Strangers and friends or acquaintances are most likely to attack a female victim. We noticed that among intimates, that is the next most likely person to attack a female, and these do account to roughly women ages 12 or older. Other relatives tend to fall to the lowest end of the scale. It's still safer for a woman or a female age 12 or older to be in a long-term intimate relationship with somebody than it is, for that female to be, they're safer there than they are with their friends, or the potential is still greater that a stranger would attract them or attack them. Now, if we take a look at males, the rate of victimization does change dramatically when males are the subject of study. Males are generally the safest in intimate and other type of relationships with families or friends. And by family and friend, I mean people that they are very close to and have very, very close relationships with. Friends and acquaintances are the next most dangerous area for males over age 12, and the most dangerous situation for a male age 12 or older is that they would be attacked by a stranger. So we do see that the victimization rates do vary by sex, and this is something that we should consider, but we should also note that women's rates of victimization overall are much lower than men's, particularly when we take a look at a longitudinal study or a lengthy study like the two charts that are on this slide, where we've got a 12-year period that we're looking at victimization rates. The next area that I want to look at is the reporting trends, and this would be non-fatal intimate partner victimization rate, and these statistics were published in one of the National Institute of Justice articles that I had posted with the discussion on the police response to domestic violence cases and is arresting the offender enough. If we take a look again at that chart here on the right, where we see the non-fatal intimate partner victimization rate from 1993 to 2005, one of the things we obviously notice right off is that the trend line is down. One of the reasons that, and a couple of the reasons that the trend lines have been down is that police are just in general receiving fewer reports. Another thing that has occurred over this 12-year period is that the police departments have become far more efficient and more familiar with these comprehensive domestic violence acts. Keep in mind we had about a 10-year period prior to this from the 1980s, about 83 or so, going forward, where we saw a rapid increase, or the trend line would actually be going in the opposite direction, climbing radically up. And we'll discuss that a little further in this presentation. However, as police have learned how to work the law and learned what judges and the courts are going to accept as domestic violence cases and how the courts are going to handle them, the police have learned how to tailor their actions to the expectations of the court. So the next thing is, and one of the important things has been, if we take a look at the awareness on the domestic violence cases, there has been a good deal of academic study on this, frequently followed by a good deal of awareness that's being brought to and the fact that there's not to be a stigma attached to reporting this. that's been brought out to the public. So with the awareness higher, a couple things will enter into play there is that some people will not report. Some men will and some women will change their behaviors and not batter their spouses or their cohabitants. The other thing is that you'll see the courts actually starting to take action, which that treatment process, if we look at that medical model that the criminal justice system is set up around, uh, people will change their behavior. The other thing that we can look at too is that when we see that 6 victimizations per 1,000 persons aged 12 or older in 1993, one of the things we should be cognizant of is that that's right around the time that President Clinton assumed political office, and he was assuming office just as the country was slowly coming out of the recession that ran from 1991 and into 1992. And as we take a look at what was going on from 93, 94, we saw a good deal of change in the economy. And by 2000, we see the rates down to about 2, and or about maybe 2.5 per thousand. And the economy was just booming. So there probably is an economic correlation to the amount of cases that are being reported to police. As one example with that, one thing we can note is that if you're working a lot and you have a lot of overtime to work, you don't have time to batter your live-in or spouse or argue with them. You're too busy going to work, making as much money as you can, and getting on with life. And when economic times are good, also, people just since most marriages we know and most cohabitation relationships that we know from other studies tend to fail because of money-related issues. This is one of the things that we should note here, that there's probably a correlation, an inverse relationship between what's going on in the national economy and what's going on in the in people's lives. Okay, in class, I had begun some discussion about that Minneapolis domestic violence study that was conducted in the early 1980s. And one of the things that we started to see right around 1980, 81, 82, 83, in that time frame was the basically a perfect storm with regards to police departments and the involvement of police officers in responding to domestic violence cases. One of the things that we started to see, and that was the lawsuits started for police either not responding or not doing anything once they responded to the domestic violence cases. And a lot of those lawsuits started to take place under the Civil Rights Acts. And we'll talk a little bit about these in our next in-class lecture. But we also start to know that, and we should be aware that the most of the suits actually start taking place under state law, and those are under the and every state has one of these. It's under the Tort Claims Act, and a lot of those suits started to come about because the Minneapolis domestic violence experiment results were published. And the Minneapolis case or situation was simply that officers responded out to calls for service, were told what to do, and it was found that the arrest had the lowest rate of recidivism or police returns to a particular residence for domestic violence cases. And at the same time, a lot of women's rights groups had focused their public relations efforts on controlling domestic violence. Also during this time frame, a lady named Tracy Thurman, who had been repeatedly battered by her husband, I believe the final case or the final incident involving her and her husband involved him shooting her, and she had the family had a long history of this. The she lived in the city of Torrington, Connecticut, and the police there had responded multiple times to calls for of domestic violence in that house. Over the period of time the Thurmans were living in Torrington, there was very limited law enforcement action. Several times charges were filed, however, they were promptly dropped because of either lack of cooperation by the victim or other parties, and by police officers just failing to show up in court to testify. And at no time were any of these arrests resulting in a conviction of Mr. Thurman. So what ended up happening is that I believe the lady who handled, the attorney who handled the case was Gloria Axelrod. She filed suit against the city of Torrington on behalf of Tracy Thurman. The case became basically a celebrity case. The attorney was quite familiar with the purpose of using the media, and the ability to use the media to kind of shape opinion. And in fact, in 1983, Thurman had a appearance on 60 Minutes following a pretty important football game, so a lot of people saw the case and were informed about the case. And the 60 Minutes appearance came on the eve of the case proceeding into the U.S. Supreme Court to determine whether police officers had an obligation to intervene in domestic violence cases, and that was one of the arguments that the city used, that it was a domestic case and they shouldn't be compelled to intervene in that. And anyhow, the case ended up settling for $1.9 million, with Tracy Thurman, being the recipient of the award. And also at the same time, the made-for-TV movie came out called A Cry for Help, and this really had the effect of turning the public opinion and also the opinion of many women from domestic cases being a private and a matter that really was more for counselors and people like that and lawyers, rather than something that public safety should be involved in. And this ended up becoming a groundbreaking case. Okay, let me start here by correcting something I just stated in the last slide. The attorney was Gloria Allred, and the lead attorney on the plaintiff's case for the Thurman versus City of Torrington was Burton Weinstein. Now, the next slide that I want to take a look at is going to be the Minneapolis domestic violence experiment. As I had indicated in class the other night, the domestic violence experiment was really a kind of a groundbreaking thing as far as people's perception on what really worked, and it really had a great deal of impact on the states, because so many of them adopted some type of a comprehensive domestic violence act, including some type of an arrest provision and the provision of a protection from abuse order, commonly called a restraining order or a domestic violence restraining order. So, taking a look at the domestic violence experiment, it was funded by the Police Foundation. It took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The experiment ran during 1981 and 1982. The primary researcher was Lawrence W. Sherman, who was the director of research at the time at the Police Foundation. And the study was paid for by the Police Foundation and also additional funding from the National Institute of Justice. Taking a look at the experiment, what we see is that the experiment is set up to really take three approaches to handling domestic violence cases. Officers, when they receive a call of domestic violence or a domestic report, were supposed to open up an envelope that would give them instructions to either arrest and transport the offender, or remove the offender from the scene, or mediate the dispute on the scene and allow the aggressor party or the offender to remain on the scene if the mediation or the counseling section went successfully. As with any study of this type, the one thing that the researchers are going to want to do is that they're going to want that assignment to go on the action of a random basis. They don't want to apply treatment in a methodical manner or have the participants be aware of the fact that they're being studied. So what they did, as I indicated, was en route to the call, the responding officer was supposed to open an envelope to find out what action was to be taken, and then every 2 weeks after the initial complaint, a follow-up call or a visit was made to the residence of the parties involved as a purpose of following up and to gather data about the after effects of the police response to the domestic violence call. The result of the study indicated that arrests produced the lowest rate of recidivism, or police officers or the police department being called to come back for another case of domestic violence. The effect of the experiment was that approximately 23 states acted relatively quickly to promulgate some type of a comprehensive domestic violence act. By the Comprehensive Domestic Violence Act, one of the things in the characteristics is that there is almost always a provision for police immunity for taking action. There is a provision there that provides for a protection from abuse order, and there's almost always a provision that either permits or requires police departments and police officers responding to domestic violence cases to make arrests. By the mid-1980s, most major police departments in the United States, as a result of the results of the Minneapolis domestic violence experiment, had put either policies in place or had statutory mandates, or a combination of both. For example, my police department had a policy that pretty much mimicked what we were going to be doing with these domestic violence cases back in the time before the state actually promulgated its comprehensive DV law. However, once the domestic violence law came into place, we had already had everything in place and were in good shape with that. Because our policy already was actually a little bit more comprehensive than the state's requirements under the statute. Over 40 states by the end of the decade had enacted comprehensive domestic violence acts, and I believe every state now has one. The protective orders and the mandatory arrests are, as I said, the two key characteristics. One of the things that does come about with the mandatory arrest policy, it's kind of an adhesion contract or a commitment contract. And what that means is that an adhesion contract, you're all familiar with them even though you may not recognize the term. And what an adhesion contract is simply that by involving yourself in some type of a relationship with another party, you have certain rights and rules and regulations and ways to resolve any potential disputes already spelled out. For example, if any of you have taken a cruise, if any of you have flown on an airplane, if any of you have attended a baseball game or a football game or an ice hockey game at any of the stadiums, you have an adhesion contract. As part of the price of the ticket, on the back or of the ticket are printed a lot of rules, regulations, and also a procedure for suing. And one of the things with the suits is that a lot of times the person offering the good or service will have chosen a method or a manner in which any disputes are going to be resolved, either through the courts, arbitration, and a lot of times a venue or a place is chosen as to where the parties will go to resolve their disputes. For example, if you buy a home today, a lot of times you will be asked, especially a new home, you'll be asked by the vendor to sign an arbitration contract. Well, new home builders, companies like Ryan, companies like Toll Brothers, companies like Lennar, is very, very bad for business if people are complaining about the quality of the homes that they build. So typically when they sell you a new home, they will put an adhesion contract in there requiring arbitration, because the proceedings are between the two parties, and there'll almost uniformly be a clause in there that will say that neither party is permitted to publicize the arbitration, the fact that the arbitration is going to take place, and they're not allowed to publicize the results of the arbitration, because if the home builder loses, they certainly don't want it out there that they sold Mr. and Mrs. Jones a bad set of kitchen cabinets, or the heating system is not adequately heating the home. So you're going to be very familiar with these. The commitment contract is very much the same thing, and what that is that by the statute being in place that mandates arrests, the victim, whether the victim wants to cooperate or not, is committed to cooperate by statute. For example, if the police go there to the home, and let's say if we take the case of Tracy Thurman, this was one of the reasons police did not want to be involved in the domestic cases, is that they were frequently sued after the victim refused to show up or failed to show up in court. And some police departments had even ironically been, officers went out, made an arrest based on statements that were given to them about how a party received their injuries, and the party would not show up in court or would go into court and tell the judge that I never told the police officer I wanted my husband or my wife arrested. And then the spouse, the abuser, would then file suit against the municipality or against the police officer and his or her employing agency for the purpose of collecting on a false arrest claim. So what the commitment contract does is that it basically requires the victim to cooperate, and if they don't, it does give provides immunity to the law enforcement officer for acting. As long as you act in good faith, the officer can do that. Now, the last thing I have on this slide, and it should be of some interest to you, is on February 2nd, 2012, the Freakonomics folks did a podcast where they discussed the protection from abuse orders and the idea of a commitment contract. And I've put the link on there. That podcast does remain up on the internet from the last time I checked. And you'll find the discussion on the commitment contract to be quite interesting. As I recall, that podcast runs about 40 minutes. So if you have interest in it, feel free to go ahead and download that. And you can pop that right onto your iPad or iPod or your MP3 player, because it's in an MP3 format. Okay, we'll move on to the results of the comprehensive domestic laws next. The advent of the comprehensive domestic violence acts have had a substantial impact on police. If we take a look at the suburban municipalities and the residential precincts and districts in urban areas, one of the things that police officers noticed almost immediately was that the domestic cases can take up a substantial portion of your workday. For example, if once the business is let out, and usually after 6 p.m. in the evening, or in areas where there's shift work, and a lot of 24-hour industries, for example, the casinos, the hospitals, things along those lines. The domestic violence cases can be an all-day occurrence, but in a lot of municipalities, it's primarily the evening and the midnight shift that will be involved with the domestic violence cases. And I had noticed almost right away that once the Comprehensive Domestic Violence Act was passed in New Jersey, or the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, the amount of time it took to process a typical case really jumped up from where we would be spending maybe a half an hour on each radio call to a domestic case to by the time the year 2000 rolled around and I was actively involved in teaching this course, my police department in Hamilton Township, Atlantic County, we were spending typically an hour and 45 minutes on each domestic case. Now, the domestic violence laws and the changes to them and the changes in the response by police have really resulted in quite a bit of study on the effectiveness of the laws. A lot of academics now are beginning to start to question the policies of having the mandatory arrest policies in place. One of the things they're starting to see or question is why the results of the Minneapolis domestic violence study were accepted so uncritically, especially given that Sherman and Burke, the two researchers, had indicated at the end of the study that one of the things they cautioned against was states going out and enacting new laws right away, and not giving researchers and academics enough time to really get out and replicate the studies, the study that was done in Minnesota in other locations, and also to try to get a little bit more in the way of a longitudinal study or a long-term study on the effects of the Minneapolis domestic violence experiment. So the other thing that plays a part in this, and I have started to see some of the women's rights groups have begun to publish. You'll see an occasional article out there in the newspaper where a researcher or an advocate will be questioning the mandatory arrest practices of a police department and maybe calling into question the police department's commitment to enforcing those domestic violence acts, as in some locations the mandatory arrest practice has slowly begun to atrophy. In other words, the police basically are not making the arrests now because there really isn't the public demand for it. Now, I had talked several times about the authors of the study wanted it replicated, and over time other cities did start taking a look at similar type of research efforts to replicate the Minneapolis experiment. And typically everywhere that it was tried, the results were not as clear and convincing as they were in Minneapolis. So the big problem with this and anything else where you see a legislative body respond very, very quickly to a constituent demand, you occasionally do get some bad laws. And I shouldn't say occasionally. You're uniformly going to get bad law. The law will be modified several times after passage of the initial law. You're going to see an example of this with the nationalized health care, or what's commonly called the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. That law was just basically rammed through, and now I realize a lot of you will take a look at this and say, oh, well, that's his politicking or But one of the things that is starting to happen now is a lot of the unions are starting to complain that, they were not aware that their health care plan fit the definition of the so-called Cadillac health care plan, and was going to result in the subscribers to that plan being taxed additionally, and they're asking the Congress to make modifications to the law. Additionally, you've seen quite a bit of kickback from the Catholic Church about its refusal to include birth control and abortion services in the healthcare offerings that they traditionally have not done. And unfortunately for Washington, that law or that rule comes from the Vatican, not from, not by statute in the United States. And I think you'll start to see, portions of Obamacare or portions of the Affordable Care Act are going to be repealed. Portions of it are going to be significantly modified. And one thing we should keep in mind: with bad law comes bad outcomes, and one of the things we will see is that people are going to become quite resentful of their congressmen and U.S. senators not being under Obamacare when the rest of us will have to be. So anyway, one of the things that really should have been done with this Minneapolis Domestic Violence Act, like every other law, is that when the initial study was published, the state should have taken their time to see what parts of the experiment were working well and what parts were not, so that they could get a better law in place. And New Jersey's law, as an example, has been rewritten 3 times. And that will bring us into our discussion on the results of the domestic and the mandatory arrest policies in New Jersey. So in our first look at the results from New Jersey, what I did was I took a look at the number of arrests that were made, and this runs 1983 to 1998. There is an error on the slide, and that's the NJDV arrests in 1983 to 2004. This runs through 1983 to 98, which is roughly the first 5 years. And if we look at the trend line here, 1983, police departments in New Jersey, right after this is the first year the law was in effect, had reported about 5,000 arrests under the first Comprehensive Domestic Violence Act. Now, a casual observer of this graphic, and the graphic was prepared using statistical data or raw number data of arrests in domestic violence cases, as published by the UCR unit at the Division of State Police in New Jersey. The one thing we see, casual observation would be like, oh my God, look at this. 5 years, the number of cases jumped from 5 to, almost 30,000 by 95. We should, remember that from our perspective here in a university setting, that what we're looking at is that what was going on during those years, and we also should be paying attention to one of the comments that appears in every one of our statistics books, that there are 2 famous quotes there, that liars figure and figures lie, and the other one that you have is the lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, this I'm hoping will kind of drive home the importance of digging a little deeper into the data and not just taking a graphical chart at face value. One looking at this would think that, wow, women are just, or spouses, I should say, are just being, beaten up regularly in New Jersey. I mean, look at the, what's going on over there with this big increase. But if we look at it in the first year in 1983, one of the things we should note is that most police departments did not have policies and procedures and the training in place for their police officers to really get a handle on what was going on with the requirements of the first Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. By 1986, we're looking at somewhere around 10,000 arrests, and in 3 years we see a doubling of that. By 1987, we're up probably 11 or 12,000 arrests. Then in 1988, one of the things we see right away is there's a huge jump, and that's the jump from about 10 to 12,000 arrests to well over 15. And one of the things that will come into effect there is that something happened. And what that was that the first Comprehensive Domestic Violence Act had been rewritten by the state legislature, and the 1983 Act permitted police officers to make arrests in the case of domestic violence. The 1987 Act required arrests where there was injury visible to one of the parties. So that provision created a substantial jump in the number of arrests. One of the things that was going on here also is that we see the arrest numbers climbing as more and more police departments and more counties have come into compliance with the law. And the new police officers being hired while they were in the police academy were receiving a significant amount of training on the handling of domestic violence cases. And my experience was at that time that frequently the younger officers were quite good at what they were doing with this, because their training had emphasized the addressing of the domestic violence cases. Now, in 1993, the law was rewritten again, and so by 94-95, we see another jump in arrests. And also at this time, one of the things that you should be made aware of is that the New Jersey's largest police department, as far as municipalities, is the Newark, New Jersey Police Department. And the Newark Police Department did not have a policy or training in place for its officers until about 1992-93, and the Uniform Crime Reporting Unit in the police department was not recording the domestic violence activity that department was seeing in compliance with the statute. However, by 92-93, they're pretty much in compliance, so the number of arrests continue to climb. Now, by 1994-95, what we're starting to see is that the arrests start to level off. But again, keep in mind we're looking at a 15-year period here, and a casual observer would be just shocked at how arrests have increased. So one of the things we should pay attention to is that our police departments are learning how to work the law. Okay, recognizing the axiom about statistics and the comments of Mark Twain and other noted observers on statistics and the presentation of data on statistics, we take a look at the domestic violence arrest statistics and the number of reported offenses from 1995 to 2004 in New Jersey. We see that the number of arrests by 2004 is down to about 25,000 statewide. We see the number at its high point was about 30,000, or just a shade under 30,000 in 1995. We see that the number of reported offenses in 2004 has dropped to about 76, 77, 78,000 from its high point of about 88, 89,000 in 1995. One of the things the number of offense trend line will show us is that except for that blip in 2001 and 2002, that the number of cases reported and reported offenses has actually is starting to show a decreasing pattern. The same thing can be said for the arrests. We see the high point in 95 and a steady decline through 2004. One of the things we should note with this is that, and keep in mind, is that police departments have begun to learn how to work the law. They now understand how the judges and the courts and the prosecutors are going to interpret the law. They know what kind of cases the prosecutor's office is going to be desiring to process and to prosecute. And they also understand very clearly what kind of cases the courts are going to be willing to not only entertain, but also the types of cases where a conviction can be sustained. And so we see a leveling off of the number of arrests and also the number of reported offenses. Now, if we contrast this with the previous slide, where we were looking at the law as it was formulated over that 15-year period, where we had 3 different laws in place, the one from 1983, the revision in 1987, and then the revision in 1992-93, we see a much different looking chart that kind of tells us that the number of cases is relatively steady. So one of the things this should tell us is that, well, I guess they finally got it right after 15 years. So one of the things with these domestic violence cases that we should understand is that there are a relatively stable number of, or certain number of marriages and cohabitation relationships where they're just not going to work out, and probably a relatively stable number of percentage of people, similar to the birth cohort studies Marvin Wolfgang did at the University of Pennsylvania, where we are seeing the once we identify who these people are who are prone to use violence against their cohabitants to solve their problems, we might be able to start to get a handle on how we're going to address that problem. So let's take a look and move on to what the future is for law enforcement with the domestic violence cases. Okay, a couple things we can be certain of. It is not likely that any of the states will begin to repeal the Comprehensive Domestic Violence Acts. One of the reasons for this is that if one takes a look at the time of day when domestic violence cases typically occur, especially in what are referred to as bedroom communities, we're going to see that in the evening and in the overnight hours. In communities where the world never stops, such as New York City, and anywhere where you have a significant number of industries that operate on a 24/7, 365 basis, the law enforcement is typically going to be the one service that's there 24/7, 365. The next thing is that where people do not have resources to involve themselves in obtaining private source resolution to their domestic living arrangement problems, and that would be the attorneys, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, social workers, other types of counselors. The police are going to continue to be the major presence in that. Police are the major governmental process that we as citizens are most likely to encounter. For example, if we take a look at just our normal day-to-day activities, are you far more likely to run into an inspector from the Department of Agriculture's meat inspection service, or are you more likely to run into your local town police officer while you are going about your daily business? Now, the meat inspector, we're certainly going to, or the food inspector, we're certainly going to encounter the product of their work because we're going to consume food, but the likelihood that we're going to have a face-to-face encounter with a government agent, most likely it's going to be a police officer, just because they're there. The next thing, and as I had indicated, the limited resources for the poor and the middle classes will cause considerable amount of law enforcement involvement in the domestic violence cases. One last note on this is that the largest thing here, the largest push on getting these comprehensive domestic violence group laws into place came from women's rights groups and women's advocacy groups. They are not likely; these folks are not likely at all to become silent and just say to the state legislator or to your state legislator that, oh, this is a great thing. Yeah, you've pretty much, the number of cases has leveled out. As we saw in the last slide, and the number of arrests has leveled out and is slightly declining. Yeah, we're going to go away, just repeal the law. That's not likely to happen. So now the next thing is that as far as the public's perspective, as the poor and the middle class need to consume the service that the police can provide with relation to domestic violence cases, the need for immediate protection is always going to be there to some degree, and it's going to be most visible and most present in the poor and the middle class. But there are wealthy people who also have these problems. If we think of that one DuPont individual who had shot and killed the wrestling coach over on the main line in Philadelphia, you've got a guy there that he had an incredible amount of money and wealth beyond anything most of us in this room would be able to conceive. In fact, he had built the DuPont Pavilion, which is now just called the Pavilion, over at Villanova University as just a gift to the university. He had also taken one of the police departments over in Montgomery, I believe in Montgomery County, and had become a part-time officer in the department, and had also worked on trying to make sure this department, the department that was policing his neighborhood, was well equipped, and that the officers were adequately trained, and he still had a great deal of difficulty controlling his anger and aggression, so much so that he shot and killed a man who intervened to stop this DuPont family member from harming somebody else. And it's just one of those things that regardless of our background and wealth, while this guy was an outlier in that family, he was somebody that required incapacitation. The last thing is in the last area I wanted to touch on with this is going to be the civil rights laws. Not only in the Tort Claims Acts in the various states, but also the federal 1983 statute, 42 U.S.C. 1983, is going to require law enforcement agencies to take some action, some immediate action, to protect the civil rights of citizens. So it's not likely law enforcement is going to see the comprehensive DV Acts disappear, but it will be something that it's just there, it's in the toolbox, and it'll be used when it needs to be used. Okay, this will complete the discussion on the comprehensive DV Acts, and hopefully this will be helpful for you in preparing your one-page paper.